So let's jump into Sparklehorse. I'll do my best here. Vivadixie submarine transmission plot from 1995. How'd I do?
You did fantastic. You did amazing.
Okay.
We could just call it Vivadixie if you want.
We'll call it Vivadixie.
Yeah, there's so many songs on this that I'm actually going into. I'm just going to call the list up of the songs. Okay.
Just so it's actually a pretty long album. It's not, 10 songs. It's like 15 or 16 or something.
16 songs. But here's the funny thing. It's 16 songs, according to this, January 1st, 1995, 47 minutes, 29 seconds.
There's a couple short instrumentals that,
that are just weird. But
I was going to ask you, I guess we can just dive right into that. What do you think the purpose is of having those short instrumentals that are more just noises or sounds? Bands like Tool do this, where they're building a certain aura and a feeling, or it's to help transition from song 1 to song 3. Sonically, they can't quite get there back to back, and they have a transition with the instrumental. Why do you think they have these two instrumentals there, or what do those mean to you?
I think, in some cases it's a way to sort of create a palette for the rest of the record and break up the song, so it's not just song, and make it more of a listening experience for the listener. I mean, I'm speculating, but the way that it's done on this record, it almost seems like it's kind of haphazard to a certain degree. Like, it doesn't feel like it's really like they really thought this, or he really thought this out. But when you listen to the record enough times, you think, no, this is really well constructed. It's the way that it's supposed to. But again, it's that sort of like, if Tom Waits if that's a soundtrack of a hobo on a train, and this one is kind of like, a drunken car mechanic in the woods or something. Like, it's just bizarre. It's a bizarre record.
I feel like that should be part of the official review, like on Wikipedia.
Just
that was good.
I mean, it's a sad story because he ended up killing himself, right? But and he's got quite the output. It's not just this record. He's put out a lot of records, like, produced things for other people, and worked with Deadmau5 for crying out loud. Or not Deadmau5, but Danger Mouse.
Danger Mouse, yeah.
Yeah, I always get the mice confused.
Do you remember how Danger Mouse broke through to the mainstream? Do you remember what it was that broke him through? So Danger Mouse was an unknown producer, and he went and he took the Beatles' White Album and the Jay-Z Black Album, and he somehow mixed them together and made the Gray Album. And it became this underground hit that the whole world was like, how did he do this? This is incredible. And then like lawsuits come out because you can't just have, manipulate Jay-Z and, two of the biggest artists of all time in the Beatles. And it made such a buzz that he became like the hottest producer in the world. That's the history of Danger Mouse.
I wasn't aware of any of that. I think
so. There's a famous Gray album out there.
I think the first time he came on my radar would have been Gorillaz. Yeah, I think Gorillaz. But yeah, but anyway, yeah, getting back to this guy, this record is like,
yeah, it doesn't have the same gloss as the other albums, just like you mentioned. But do you think that's a part of what makes it endearing, and that's a part of the appeal, is that lack of gloss?
I think I can speak on this a little bit because in that period of time, 1997 or whatever, there was a big, you got to remember, like, Nirvana came out and sort of shook the world up with Nevermind, but then they came out with Heart Shaped Box. And if you, or is that the, what's
In Utero?
In Utero, so Heart Shaped Box being the single. That's right. But if you go back and you listen to Nevermind and you listen to In Utero, Nevermind sounds like slick as hell by comparison. And sort of what was happening, and I remember this because I was making records in during that period of time, and we were consistently trying to make everything that we were doing more lo-fi, more lo-fi, more lo-fi, more lo-fi, more lo-fi. This is way precursor to the lo-fi movement now. Because it's an aesthetic, and there's a certain honesty that I think people can relate to, and it doesn't have that sheen and that gloss of a lot of the other stuff that was going on at the time. Because you got to remember, it's like I remember being on being working at Wellesley Sound, I think I was working in the tape dubbing room, and we had Q107, which was the big radio station in Toronto, on at the time, all the time. And you could hear Life is a Highway and Nirvana and Pearl Jam at the same time. So there's a big difference going on there, and a big transition sort of happening. And slowly but surely, it's like things got grungier and uglier and darker, and well, not maybe not necessarily darker, but more lo-fi, more lo-fi, more lo-fi. And I think a sense of honesty on this record because of the way that it sounds. Like it sounds at times where it was recorded on a 4-track cassette, and it very well may have been that that's a song that it was just like, this is the way that the song is supposed to sound, and I'm doing it in my kitchen or whatever, and there it is. You know, and that aesthetic kind of goes through the whole thing. But then you have like this unbelievable take on, you know, like Homecoming Queen, Rainmaker, Spirit Ditch, Tears on Fresh Fruit, Cow. Like the outro, Cow, is unbelievable. Like it's just so musical and so emotional. You know, and who writes a freaking chorus, a pretty girl milking a cow? Like who does that, you know? But it's a challenge. It's a challenge to get through those 16 songs. There's no question about it.
And how did you initially discover this album? How does this come to your attention? Because this is another, so Sparklehorse is another one of the bands where it seemed like people in the know loved it. You know, other musicians loved it. They were like critical darlings of musicians, but just the fan base didn't show up. Like there wasn't hit singles, there wasn't big album sales.
No, God, there wasn't big. I don't think there was big album sales. I would never have known of this record. I was doing a session at Hypnotic Studios, and we were doing Blue Rodeo. And I think I mentioned this when we spoke before, but the Blue Rodeo sessions that I did were based around they were trying to raise money and awareness for Leonard Peltier, who had been wrongfully convicted for, I think it was killing an FBI agent. And there's a whole bunch of who's of Canadian artists that were on this record, like Sarah McLachlan was on it, and it's a big deal. And during the session, somebody had mentioned Sparklehorse, and I think it might have been Jim Cuddy, and he was just talking about, oh my God, have you heard this? And we were like, no. And he was, and I think he said, just don't even hesitate, just go buy it, and I did. I went out and bought it because I'm thinking, man, it's like, you know, one of the best songwriters I've ever worked with is telling me to go buy this. I should probably go buy this. So I went and I bought it and I put it on, and Homecoming Queen comes on, which is warped, and it sounds like the tape is all warped, kind of strange, and the instruments are kind of like, what the hell? And he starts singing, and it broke my heart. And I was captivated from that point on. And I just almost wore that CD out. I just completely fell in love with it, every aspect of it. And at the same time, you know, we were sort of like going down that road aesthetically in terms of, I was working a lot with Darren Barry, who owns the Orange Lounge recording studio. And I think we did the Maid record somewhere around there, which is a lo-fi album. And I did Hayden for the Trees Lounge soundtrack.
Love Hayden.
Yeah. So do I. Love him. Wonderful human being. And that's a lo-fi thing. And so I was very much, my head was in that world, right? And so this record just resonated with me.
So I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't fact check this story with members of Blue Rodeo themselves. So I have a quote here. This is from Glenn Milcham, Blue Rodeo drummer. He's sharing his love of the album to help paint that picture. So this is what Glenn says. He says, Basil Donovan, our bass player, is also a big Sparklehorse fan. Right. Yeah. I love the simple, beautiful songs, the dark, surreal, and introspective lyrics, and the raw, intimate production. Mark Linkous, which is the singer from Sparklehorse, was one of those terminally depressed songwriters who came to a tragic end, but somehow still managed to capture a lot of beauty in his writing. David Berman of Silver Jews and Purple Mountains, and Jason Molina of Songs Ohio and Magnolia Electric Company also come to mind as being members of this unfortunate club. So that's what Glenn has to say about that album.
Yeah, he's right. In fact, I do remember it was probably even Basil that sparked the conversation in the studio. And of course, when they played, I saw them at the Horseshoe.
No way.
Yeah, I saw them at the Horseshoe, and he had it was an odd accident. You can read about this. I don't remember exactly what happened, but I think obviously there were, he suffered from serious depression and some, there were drugs involved and whatnot. And I think he had either passed out or whatever in some weird, awkward position where it cut the blood supply off to his legs.
Yeah.
He lost like the use of his legs or whatever. So when I saw him at the Horseshoe, he was in a chair. Like he was sitting in a chair, and you could see like he would like grab his leg and sort of like lift it up and let his leg drop on a guitar pedal. And it was just like, what the hell? This is unbelievable. But they sounded live virtually identical to the way the record sounded. And I thought, Jesus, there's a really, really good example of how the performance was captured on the record, and just that's what it sounds like. How did you make that record sound like that? Oh, that's easy. They put the mics up in the room, and that's what it sounds like.
I guess that's one of the perks of doing a lo-fi record is it's easier to reproduce live.
It's easier to reproduce live, but it's not easy to capture it.
Hmm.
It's really hard. It's hard. This is going to be funny, but it's hard to make shitty sounds. And because sometimes if you do it the wrong way, it just sounds bad. If you do it the right way, it sounds kind of cool and compelling, but it's really, really difficult to make things that don't sound all that great to the uninitiated into that world, right?
Do you think a part of that is because technology and equipment has gotten so good now that things just naturally sound great? So you actually have to work to like reverse engineer to make it sound less polished and great?
And I think that's why, there's some really interesting movements going on right now where people are recording on 4-track cassette machines and things, because there's a certain way that it reproduces the sound, and it kind of glues together the performance that, yeah, it's not perfect, but it's honest. And I appreciate that. I mean, I spent enough time in that world that I definitely appreciate that. I also, like things like Talk that sound like, God mixed them.
I actually have the story here about what happened to him and his legs. I thought it was worth mentioning just for our listeners that aren't familiar. So it's funny because it mentions Radiohead again here. So in 1996, while touring Europe with Radiohead, shortly after the album's release, Mark Linkous consumed a combination of antidepressants, Valium, alcohol, heroin, and other drugs in a London hotel room. Unconscious and with his legs pinned beneath him for almost 14 hours, the resulting potassium buildup caused his heart to stop for several minutes after his body was lifted up. The ensuing surgery almost caused him to lose the use of both legs, and as a result, he needed to use a wheelchair for 6 months, and he required dialysis for acute kidney failure, and apparently his legs never recovered. Like they got a little better, but they never fully recovered, which is what you're saying.
Yeah, it was, you could see that you were seeing somebody in trouble. Like there was, I don't know, again, an honesty to the performance, and it sounded like it wasn't loud. I remember being a really, really quiet PA, and just a lot of people sort of like sitting there listening to this, and it was uncomfortable to watch, but it was also it was so riveting. And he sounded exactly the way he does on the record.
You were talking about the lo-fi recordings, and some people are going back and recording on 4-track. On Facebook, I don't know if you know producer engineer Siegfried Meyer.
Yeah, of course. I don't know him. I don't know him. I've never met him. I mixed something that he recorded 2 years ago, but yeah.
Okay, so when I was 18, I went to school for audio engineering in London, Ontario. I went to OE Art, and he was there either as a guest speaker or a teacher or something. So that's our connection way back more than half my life ago now as time flies by. But I just saw him post. He does a lot of videos to do with mixing and recording and all that stuff. And he posted a little cassette recorder, and he goes, "Oh, look what I found." And he goes, "What's amazing about this is the natural microphone on it has this built-in compressor, and he goes, almost everything sounds great. So he puts it in front of a drum kit, and he's in an actual studio, and he just wails on the drums. And when he plays it back, it sounded so incredible. And it was just through this little self-compressed mic on a tape recorder.
I used to love going into any rehearsal space with a band in pre-production. We had the the boom box, and the boom box had microphone or 2 microphones on it if it was really crazy. And they always had the compressor, and you pop it in a recorder, and the band would start playing, and it just sounded unbelievable. When you play it back, you're like, yeah, this is so cool because of that thing, right? But that's, that's been going on for forever. Like the Peter Gabriel thing, they did that. That's that whole background vocal thing. Again, I don't know if any of that was employed on this record, but you go back and you listen to God, I'm blanking, but Rolling Stones songs. Jumpin' Jack Flash, for instance, is not an electric guitar. It's an overloaded acoustic guitar recorded onto a cassette, played back from the cassette, remiked through a speaker, and then flown onto the tape. So, this concept has been going on for a long time.
So my initial reaction when listening to the album for the first time, so I was actually at the gym. So I remember, like, it's leg day. Leg day sucks. This music is like a great soundtrack to doing leg day. And I just remember thinking, like, man, this is like a beautiful collection of songs. So a lot of times you can't say that about music. Like, you wouldn't say, like,
No.
I don't know, that Metallica song is beautiful. Like, not all music you can say that to, but I found that there was something endearing about the album. There was a beauty, to the songs. I found that the album was a mix of like ballads, solo acoustic songs, and then kind of raw indie rock. Is that an accurate description of what's on there?
Yeah, it's a great description of it. That's exactly what it is. And there's songs that are more produced than other ones, and it always, there's an honesty in that record, and melody. The melodies are fantastic, and the lyrics are just so left field. Who writes a song about a beautiful widow, or, like I was saying, a girl milking a cow, or homecoming queen, which is actually, that in itself is not that unique, but just the way it's presented is like, whoa. Yeah, there's just really, someday I will treat you right. Your own failings as a human being in a relationship. It's just a really, really, really honest record. And I think, in a weird way, it's like the baby brother to the Tom Waits record, whereas the Tom Waits record is kind of like a much bigger production and much bigger sound, even though it's still kind of lo-fi. This is like really lo-fi. I mean, it's not guided by voices lo-fi, but it's lo-fi.
And what ties us together is it turns out that all-time great artists like PJ Harvey and Tom Waits actually loved that album. Oh, yeah. So to tie, we're talking about Tom Waits, and then we're talking about this album. Tom Waits was actually a big fan of this album.
I can't see how you couldn't be a songwriter and not at least see the value of it. Maybe not love it, but at least just be enamored by it. And again, this is one of these things where I've worked with bands who are very much into Sparklehorse who didn't know about this record. And I was like, that's funny, because I don't know any other records.
I guess they have like 4 or 5 records too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had compared, which band was it? Was it Talk Talk? I compared the singer to Roxy Music. And in this case, while I'm listening, I'm hearing a little bit of Elliott Smith.
Oh yeah. God, yeah.
And again, where I said it's not a lot of artists where you can say the music or the songs are beautiful. And Elliott Smith is one of those artists where you listen and you're like, wow, that's a beautiful song or beautiful melody. So I heard a little bit of Elliott Smith in this. And what is kind of crazy is Elliott Smith is another one of those tortured artists that killed himself. And I don't know if this is true, but I've heard Elliott Smith killed himself by sticking a knife in his own heart, like of all the singer-songwriter poetic ways to go. And then Mark Linkous of Sparklehorse apparently shot himself in the heart. And it like kind of ties those two super gifted haunted, tragic singer-songwriters kind of puts them both together.
And it just goes to show you how much, the humanity involved behind it, right? Yeah, it's heartbreaking in both cases. I remember hearing Needle in the Hay and just losing my mind, thinking, oh my God, this might be the best song I think I've ever heard. The Elliott Smith track, Needle in the Hay. And yeah, there's a very strong similarity going on between the two of them. You can hear it,